Hi, guys. Welcome to Journey of a Joyful Life podcast. I'm your host, Melodie Chandler, and it's great to be back. I have really enjoyed all the stories that we've been hearing of families with their children and their adoption stories, and also some biological stories as well. I just think it's so important when we get together and share stories. So, what I realized though was that I told my story or stories about adopting my kiddos, but I didn't tell the stories about my biological kiddos and their births and just some situations around that. And as the summer has kind of come upon us, getting ready for some of their birthdays, I'm just really reminded about the goodness of the Lord and how faithful that He has been in their lives. And I think when I think back to each one of my biological children, and I'm not going to talk really very much today about my losses because I have lost 5 biological babies. But for my babies that are living, my 3 little ones, I normally call them the 3 little ones. The Lord definitely had a unique story for each one of those. And probably growing up longing to have my own kids and being surrounded by people who loved children and had a lot of children. I mean, just the communities of people that I grew up with, lots of families we were around had a lot of kids. And I loved that. That was my dream. Probably if you met childhood Melody, you would have definitely heard me say I wanted to have 20 kids. That was my dream forever, is that I had 20 children. And I don't think really I even had unrealistic expectations. Like, I really thought I'm going to get married really young. I'm just going to pop out the babies because I love babies and I loved birth even from a very young age. I got to attend my first home birth when I was only 4 years old. I was really young and it moved me. I mean, it was so impactful. It was beautiful. And I've always been like an old soul, I guess. And so I didn't feel 4 at the time. And so just understanding what birth was about and how babies are born and loving babies so much has just been who I am. And so I just gravitate to babies. I'll hold anybody's baby. And I have been like that for many years since I was really young. So as I got older and wasn't married for a long time, I found out that I could possibly struggle just because of some health things that I dealt with. I could possibly struggle to get pregnant or to have children biologically. And so I think that's whenever my dream sort of had to change. At least I wanted it to change in my heart that I could still be a mother, even if I didn't biologically give birth to a baby. And I don't think I ever thought that I wouldn't love a baby that I adopted. Like, I just love children. I loved children I took care of for other people and loved them like my own. And so loving people in general is just part of who I am. And so, especially little ones. And so, having the thought of I'm just going to adopt a child and, you know, that's going to be my baby was like, of course, that's the way God's going to give me children. And so after I got married, I didn't know like if I'd be able to have children or not. So what I quickly learned was that getting pregnant wasn't hard for me. Staying pregnant was really hard. And wow, I did not understand the implications of like the pain, that was surrounding all those things. But being able to carry Julie and, you know, stay pregnant with her. I had already had a loss very early on before her. And so just struggling a little bit at the beginning, I had some, things that led me to believe I might lose her really early on. And so at that time I was living in China. So that was kind of my first personal interaction with the medical care system for mothers in China. I was had been very well versed for babies, what it would be like, because I had lived that over and over again, taking care of babies, especially sick babies. But I had seen many mothers taking care of their babies in the hospital before I had Julie. And I knew I don't really want to have a baby here. So if I am able to get pregnant, I definitely want to go back to the States because my heart was to have my baby at home. I loved home birth. I love home birth. I think it's a beautiful thing, and I understand that it's not for everybody, and that I love that women get to choose where they give birth to their babies, whether that be in a hospital or in a birthing center or at home or in a field. I don't know, whatever they choose. And for me, my dream of my life was to have a water birth at home. And so after I had got out of my first trimester with Julie, I had already been at the Chinese hospital multiple times, back and forth in my early pregnancy with Julie because of spotting, and I had to take progesterone like really early on. And so being very well versed with how that works in China is very different than the way it works in America, because I had lots of ultrasounds very early on with Julie, because they were, I think, mostly worried that I was a foreigner coming to their hospital. And they knew I really wanted this baby. They asked me immediately upon arrival, the very first time I ever went when I was spotting, well, do you even want the baby? And I was like, yes, I definitely want the baby. That's not an option for me, but that is what I learned over the years, was that's what they ask everyone before anything is done, to help you at all with your pregnancy. The first question is, do you want it? Is it viable in their standards? Um, and that's how you move forward. And so I had a very sweet, kind, I would say kind. I realized later she was very kind to me. The bedside manner is totally different there, but she was very kind to me. And so my experience with all of the tests and all of the help that I received whenever I was preparing for Julie to be born was really great. And I was at a private hospital um, in the city where I lived, and I felt very invested with that doctor because she had been so kind to me and supportive, especially once she knew my heart and things like that about the baby. And also, I think she was a little bit like, "Oh, can you just show me the baby after it's born? Because I want to see what it looks like." So that was so funny. Um, but I had planned to come back to the States, so I had contacted a midwife close to where my parents lived, and you know, decided that I definitely liked her. I wanted to use her, and I would come back to my parents' home to give birth in Nacogdoches and at home. And so it was great. I was so excited about that plan. And we had Children's Day in China. So every June 1st is Children's Day. And it's right around that time. And I think that's gotten me like all the feels, because we would have a huge party with all of our kids. And I was pretty big pregnant at that time. And I had hoped to stay a little bit longer, but I was feeling some things, and I just wanted to be careful. So after Children's Day was over the next week, we headed to the States, which was about 4 weeks before I was supposed to, maybe closer to 6 weeks, but it ended up being like 4 weeks before I gave birth. And um, yeah, coming to America after like just having all the prenatal stuff in China. I did come to America one time that March because we had a conference at our church, and that was super special. I got to meet my midwife in person at that time, and loved her. That was May's first time to come to America, which was really special. And so once we got to Nacogdoches and kind of got settled in, I was ready. Like, okay, the baby can come anytime, but it wasn't quite ready for her to come. But um, eventually, what happened was that my amniotic fluid sac tore. And so my water didn't really break, but I started to leak amniotic fluid. And um, so it was difficult for the midwife to decide, like, is it going to be safe for you to deliver at home with your fluid leaking? Should we call this your water breaking and start a time clock, or should we let you keep going? And I was at 37 weeks at the time, so it was still really early, but she was fine. I was almost 38 weeks. She was fine for me to deliver at home because the baby was looking good and measuring well. Um, but I did that slow labor for about 45, 48 hours and nothing progressed. And I still continued to leak fluid. And so my sister is a labor and delivery nurse, or she was then. And so, everybody kind of said, like, you really need to make the choice to go to the hospital and let them help you to be induced so that it's, safe and all those things. And so, one of like the hardest things for me was to accept the fact that I needed to go to the hospital. I was really, really set on having a home birth, and the pool was set up in my parents' room, and like everything was ready. Um, and I had experienced many, many home births. Like, I experienced the first one when I was really young, but I had experienced many, many more. And hospital births that I had gotten to be a part of as a doula and just as a supportive friend. And so just knowing that I was going to have to go to a hospital was extremely hard and lots of tears. Um, but I did end up going because ultimately the most important thing was that my baby was safe and healthy, and um, we didn't really know what was to come. So we went very begrudgingly, I will say, and not happy with anyone. Like no one could do anything right at this point. Like I was just mad at the world, and also just wanted to have the baby, and I didn't want any, I wanted the least amount of help, and so I had my birth plan, very detailed birth plan, and at the very end it said, and if the worst case scenario happens, I'll go to the hospital. And I just remember thinking, I have no more birth plan. Why is this the worst case scenario? And so truthfully though, it was like terrible in my mind. And most people won't understand that because like tons of babies are born in beautiful settings at the hospital. It was just a me thing. It was just the death of a vision. Once again, the death of a vision that I really a dream that I had to have a home birth. And so I had all kinds of natural methods of induction for hours and hours and hours and hours. Because when I got there, it was 48 hours. And so then when I got to the 60-hour mark, after having lots of different induction methods, um, I finally was willing to have an epidural. And I had already had Pitocin for quite a few hours at that time, like almost 12 hours of Pitocin, and I was miserable. And so, kind of another letdown for me was that I had to have an epidural. I really didn't want to do that. But at 60 hours of labor, I was like all done. And so I had the epidural, and then I slept. Oh, P.S. When I got the epidural, I was still barely a two after all those hours of labor. So I was really exhausted, and I knew I had to get much further along. And I really didn't want to have a C-section. So I would say that those midwives at the hospital and nurses, especially my sister, she was very supportive, but they made it to where like nothing was rushed so that I didn't have to force a C-section. Um, but I did sleep for like 10 hours after I got the epidural. I hadn't slept for days. And whenever I woke up, I was at a 10 and I was fully effaced and ready to push out the baby. And at that point, I think I was kind of numb also because like nothing had gone the way I wanted it. And so I just remember saying like, nobody's going to touch the baby. I'm going to touch her and I'm going to pick her up and put her on me. Like once she starts to come out, that's going to be what I'm going to do. Like some sort of control I needed to have over this situation that was totally out of my control. And again, I realize that for some people that's like crazy ridiculous, but that's me and that was my heart and what I wanted. And so they were very supportive. The midwife was so sweet, who helped deliver Julie, and all my natural things that I wanted to have happen after she was born was totally fine. Everyone was respectful of all my wishes and ways. And so that was, it got to be a really beautiful thing, even though when I look back on it, it's still really hard to think about like that my body didn't do exactly what it's supposed to do. The beautiful thing is Julie was healthy, she was wonderful and breathing and all the great things. And now she's very excited that she has to tell people she was born in Nacogdoches. She loves that. But my whole family was there. My mom and my dad and my sister, they were all there whenever I gave birth. That was really important to me. My dad is a really strong person for me. We're very similar. And so to have him there, I was like, he like helped me to count to whenever I was pushing. And I just remember that was like one of the most comforting things to be. My mom is like the steadiest prayer warrior and rock. And, you know, she was there doing all of that. And my sister was like behind the scenes making sure that they weren't doing anything that I was going to get really mad at them for, which is also, she knows me really well. Even though we're very different in the way that we do things, she was protecting me on that side. So after I had Julie, like I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Like, okay, I've given birth to her, we got to leave. And, you know, don't let anybody come in. Like, we're going to be all by ourselves. And the hospital was probably really glad whenever I left because didn't love all of the people in the room and definitely never let them touch her or take her anywhere. Um, Again, just my weird things, but that's how I do it. And I was grateful that they respected that. But when we got home, a really hard thing for me was like that part of that whole like natural dream that I had was that I would be able to nurse my babies. And yeah, I didn't get to do that because my milk never came in for Julie. And so a huge death of a vision for me was like not being able to feed her myself. And I learned years later the reason why that was, but I had really bad postpartum depression after Julie was born because I think I felt like so many failures had happened. Like my expectations were way up here and like what I had wanted. And then it was like, well, that didn't get to happen and that didn't get to happen. And, oh, you're failed at that too. And then, you know, oh, you can't even feed your baby. Well, then that's like way down here. And I realized, you know, feeding with the bottle is wonderful and praise the Lord that we have that. And so many people donated milk to me. It was beautiful. And she still got to have breast milk for a long time because people donated it. And then we lived in China, so we got to have like really clean, pure goat's milk because in European countries, that's like the milk powder that they have in China is either like not great or the really nice European kind. So we got to have that. It was wonderful. I always remember thinking like we spend the most money on Julie's food because it costs so much to buy this milk, but I'm grateful that it was available to us, which is also something really interesting that I had obviously never even looked into. But when we went back to China, we stayed here for about 6 weeks after she was born and, you know, have to get all the birth certificate and passport and visa and all the things. But her little picture in her passport, it's like, oh my goodness. So crazy to remember her being so little and we had to like lay her down on the floor at the CVS to like, get the picture, you know, with the right background and everything, but it was great. So, struggling with postpartum was really hard, especially because I was like back in China and didn't feel, you know, it was just like back doing all the things that I did before and feeling really isolated in the sense that people don't understand kind of like what I'm going through. And also, I didn't really talk about it, but not a lot of sensitivity to what I was struggling with. And when she was 6 months old, I came back to the States with her because my grandfather had passed away and it was important for me to come back. And so I did kind of make a cry out for help at that time and see a doctor and get some medicine. And that was the wisest thing that I did was to get help because I hadn't really ever known of people who had struggled with postpartum depression, or at least if they did, I didn't know about it. And I realize it's something that people don't talk about very much. And I wish they had because I wish I had been more clued in to the signs, like that I could get help and I didn't have to struggle in those ways. So it was a blessing. And the doctor I saw in the Woodlands was just precious and so sweet and prayed with me and so supportive. And it really helped me to get over just the lull and the depression that I was experiencing. And it was a blessing. So I was able to take that and then get off of the medicine and, you know, it was wonderful. So whenever I got pregnant again, well, I got pregnant 2 more times and lost those babies. And then when I got pregnant with Shan, Um, that was that was crazy. So, if you've ever experienced a loss, you know that once you lose a baby, every pregnancy after that is pretty ridden with anxiety and fear. Um, and I love the Lord and trust Him so much, but it was such a struggle for me not to have anxiety and fear like every time I would get pregnant. And I didn't have super great healthy coping skills with all of that. Just again felt really alone, especially going into Chinese hospitals because anytime you lose a baby, they just tell you that you've had an abortion. Technically that's what they call all those things. It's just your body intrinsically aborted the baby is what they said. And probably because the baby wasn't viable, they tell you all these things, all the things that I knew, but it was like hearing it over and over and over again and having to experience it there where you're alone. And the way that they handle all that stuff is just much more different than here. And the sensitivity about it is different. And the value of life is different. And so, where I would be like, finding out that the baby didn't have a heartbeat, and here in the States, I've heard, I haven't experienced it in the same way, but, um, it's very sensitive and they don't just do the ultrasound and then tell you, like, oh, well, your baby's dead. And that's what they told me every time. Like, they would just do the ultrasound and are like, oh, well, your baby's dead. I'm like, oh my gosh, something that you're not expecting and you just can't even imagine. And the culture is so different, right? Like those women that, I mean, they would tell me, oh yeah, the baby's dead, it's fine. Like no emotion about it. And my heart was just ripped out, and I'm crying and they're like, why are you crying? They can't, it's so, so different. It's very hard to explain even. And it was so hard to live in that and understand like they're not really actually being heartless. They just don't have the same feelings that you do because they've been grown up in a culture that is completely different with valuing life. And so I knew very much at this point that anytime I were to get pregnant, I had to start progesterone immediately if I had any hope of keeping the baby. And so immediately went to the hospital. The doctor knew me, prescribed the progesterone. And that doctor that was at the hospital that I had really loved before, but the sweet doctor, she wasn't there anymore. And this doctor was very rude and very hard to deal with. And so I ended up switching actually to another hospital in the city that was run by the American Red Cross. And it's very ironic that it was run by the Red Cross, but a very sweet hospital, very small. And the doctors were super kind. And so I felt like, okay, I have another kind person on my journey, but I had to convince them that I need to have the progesterone like immediately. And so they did the lab work, and sure enough, my body is super low in that. And they gave me the medicine, but every time I would go back there, it was just a really interesting and difficult experience. Um, but for Shan, I felt like probably I shouldn't go back to the States because a lot of hard things were happening in our home and in situations around us. We still had all of our kiddos at that time, our kiddos from the orphanage, and I did not feel comfortable going to the States. And so I had decided I would go to Thailand and just kind of tour the hospital. Some of my friends had had their babies in Thailand, and I'll go and tour the hospital and see what it's like. I started having some really early labor with Shan, like whenever he was like 6.5, 7 months in utero. And so I went to Thailand and did a bunch of testing, saw the hospital, decided I really loved that hospital and I would go there to give birth. And so we'd have to go there, um, a substantial amount of time early so that we were there in enough time to, be there for the birth and all that stuff. And I had talked to them all about like natural birth and what my plan was. And they were so kind. And so my body was just like not doing great things. And so I was struggling with this preterm labor back and forth. I'd gotten an infection and all kinds of hard stuff. But I had come back and forth a little bit from Thailand to our home in China and felt really comfortable with the care that I was getting until the orphanage and the police came and took all of our children away. And so that happened in July. And I knew Like, I can't leave. I can't leave China to have this baby in Thailand when all of my babies just got ripped away from me. We're trying all these different things to be able to get them back, to have them in a different way, to be able to take care of them. I mean, the orphanage director, you know, talked to us about maybe coming into the orphanage, letting our IEs go into the orphanage and supporting the kids there, and we would just oversee that. And then, you know, all these different things were talked about. And I'm like, we just can't leave. So I went back to the original hospital that I didn't like the doctor. I went back to that hospital and I just said, you know, what about if I give birth here? Because the Red Cross hospital, you have to go to a public hospital. You can do prenatal stuff there, but you can actually give birth in that hospital. And so I knew I didn't want to go to the public hospital. So I went back to that other private hospital and they were fine to take me back. I just switched to a different doctor that I liked a little. And so, but she was very strict. Like, if you don't, because I said, like, I feel like that he's like, he's going to take a long time to come. Like, I'm going to need, I want to make sure, like, I can go to 42 weeks and you're not going to pressure me. You know, at 42 weeks, then we can talk about induction, but I want to make sure. And she was like, oh, yeah, 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 that's fine. That's totally fine. You know, they think somewhat more holistically there in some ways. And so I felt pretty comfortable with her. The day that all of our children got taken away, my mom had already planned to come to China. And so, like, they did all that in the morning, and then my mom arrived in the evening because she was going to be there for the birth of Shan. And I imagined, like, it wouldn't be too much longer before he was born. And oh man, I was in for a really big uproar because just things kept spiraling. And I needed Sammy and George's adoption to be finalized before I gave birth to Shan because in my home study, our home had a certain number of people. So for Sammy and George to be adopted into that home, you after a home study can't change at all. And my adoption agency was working so hard with us to make sure that Sammy and George's adoption could happen quickly. But because of all this uproar in China, legally with all the things happening, it just kept getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. And when the orphanage came in, it was actually not, they did take some of our kids in July, but it was actually in August whenever they came and took all of them. The very end of July. So the director said, well, we're going to come and we're going to take all your kids, but we're going to leave Sammy and George because we know technically that they're already yours, that you're going to adopt them so they can stay in your home. They don't have to go back to the orphanage until the paperwork is finished. And I wanted really badly to be happy about that. I was very grateful and very happy about that. But also at the same time, I was devastated that all of my kids who I loved were going to see, why did she choose to keep Sammy and George? And then, like, she's just letting them take us. And there had been so much turmoil for the majority of my pregnancy with Shan, the day that they came and took the kids. I mean, that's like historically where I feel like I probably had a mental break. Like, it was terrible. I mean, I've never screamed so loud. Chen made me go in the van. We were in our apartment complex, like parking garage, and the police were there and buses and like to haul them all off. And the police came so that they didn't have any trouble. And the children were screaming bloody murder. Mama, 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 no, don't want to go. And like crying out and crying out. And I'm like hugging them. And they're telling me this whole time, don't make a scene, Melody. Keep your mouth shut. Don't make a scene. And I'm just, okay, very hormonal, thinking like, I want to give all of you the middle finger and tell you to, shove it where the sun don't shine. I was so angry. My heart was so full of anger and bitterness. And truly, like, I don't remember, maybe one other time, remember being like that angry and just the rage inside my heart of the injustice that would come of all of this, of all the children being taken away and them screaming. And I'm literally standing here and them asking me, oh, just stand nicely, you know, the orphanage director told me that. Just stand nicely. Don't make any emotion. And I was like, yeah, right. I don't actually care what you say. Like, you take me to jail. I was just so angry. And after I basically totally lost my mind in front of all of them, and they were totally embarrassed, and I made everybody lose face, which I didn't care at that time. They like made me go in the van, and I'm screaming and crying. I'm just crying. I just am just from the uttermost parts of my inner being, just crying and screaming. And I'm angry at God, and I'm angry at China, and I'm angry at everybody. I'm just angry. And it hits me. I've just ruined Shan's life. Like, I'm carrying him, and I've just put him through hell. And he's never going to be the same. Like, I've just ruined his life. Like, I've affected him in a way that I can't reverse. And it kind of like just overtook me in a very terrible way. And I think I was already in the perfect place to go into a very dark depression. But just thinking like, I've lost everybody, all my kids that I've given my life to serve and love. I'd have done anything for them, but I couldn't. I couldn't even do one thing. I couldn't even keep them from going back into like devastation and trauma with no hope of ever being able to see them or help them again, you know. And they all, drove away and left, and it was horrible. And there I was, just left, pregnant with this baby that I loved, but I was in a really bad place. And then Sammy and George upstairs, and, Julie. And, Julie's little best friend had just had to get on the bus because Noah, he had to go back to the orphanage. And she didn't understand. She was 2. And Aunt May, his best friend, who she'd known ever since she walked in the doors of our home, gone, with no hope because she was already an adult. And it was just like everywhere you look. I mean, we have all these apartments and they're all empty. Everyone's gone. It just like in the matter of moments, it's so traumatizing, so traumatizing. And police, and then the police like basically watched us for months after that to make sure that we didn't do anything. We had some kids that were from families that were still living at our house, and the government basically told all those families that they had to come and pick up their kids. They couldn't be in our home anymore. They couldn't come to our school. And they gave them a time frame of like, you have until this time to come and pick up your kid. They can't be at Melodie's house anymore. And that was devastating. Some of those kids had been at our home for years, and their parents had the ability to work because they had been living in our home, and, with very significant needs. And yeah, it was just really devastating. So most of them came to get them. There were 5 of them that really struggled to come back and get them because of where they worked and things like that. And so we kind of helped to make it look like they were in the process of leaving. But they were able to stay with us for a little bit longer. And Tia was still with us because her orphanage didn't care that she was with us, which was really nice. She got to stay the whole time. But as I got closer to giving birth to Shan, I just remember thinking, like, I don't know how I'm going to give birth to him. Like, how do I even have the energy to get him out of me? And at the same time, Sammy and George's adoptions still were not finished. And so we got through August, and I just remember thinking, like, this is supposed to be done a long time ago. Like, the adoptions were supposed to be done in June, and then July, and then it's August. And I'm like, I do not know how long I can carry this baby. I mean, my due date was at the end of August, and or like the early, like then the 20s of August. And, you know, I don't know how much longer we can go, but I have to sign the adoption before, I have Shannon. So I was just praying, like, Lord, everybody, I feel like the whole world was praying, like, don't let her have the baby. But at the same time, I'm like, well, I'm 41 weeks pregnant, how much longer can I have this baby in me? But I'm like, don't do too much because you really don't want to go into labor because I really need to be able to finish the adoption. So the hospital was being pretty kind to work with me. And finally, the adoption day came on a Thursday. And I was so grateful. I'm just like ginormously pregnant. And we go and to do the adoption. Of course, everyone has to comment like, "Oh my gosh, when are you gonna have your baby?" And like, very soon. And sign the paperwork, do all those things, take Sammy and George back home, and then we went straight to the hospital. Like, okay, I'm gonna be 42 weeks pregnant on Saturday. Like, I gotta start getting him out of me because at 42 weeks they were just gonna like make me have a C-section. Well, I was so tense. There's no way any baby was coming out of me. I'm like, it's very psychological. Like having a baby, you have to release the baby. Like you have to calm down. And I was so traumatized. It was really, really hard and terrible. So I did a bunch of things at the hospital. I was probably there for like 6 hours. And one of my sweet friends from Wuhan had come in to be with us. She's a doctor and just precious woman and just prayed and prayed and prayed with us. And so we had gone to the hospital, been there for 6 hours, and they came into my room and said, well, we've made the decision that you can't deliver him here. We've just decided that it's probably best for everyone if you leave and go somewhere else. And I was like, excuse me? Like, we already paid you all the money to have him here. And I'm like pretty much 42 weeks pregnant, so I don't really have a lot of options. And they were like, "Oh no, it's fine. You can go to the public hospital down the way. I'm sure they'll take you." I was like, "No, no, no. I don't want to go to the public hospital. Like this is not the greatest place to go to the public hospital. That's why we chose to come here. It's like the second best in the city. Or, the best place in the city that we could come." And they were like, "Well, I'm sorry, you have to leave." And then the police came and made sure that we left. And so we left. Then they called on our way back to our home to again make sure that we knew that they cared about us and they loved us, but don't ever come back to the hospital. I remember they gave me like a basket of fruit as I left. They gave us our money back, which was interesting. And they gave me a basket of fruit. And I was so angry. Like, one more reason just to be so angry. I just remember thinking, like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to get rid of all this anger in my heart. And I just want to hold my baby. And I literally did not know what we were going to do. I mean, I'm just clueless. Like, what are we going to do? We have to have the baby. And I knew if I did end up going into labor at home, that China wouldn't recognize it and I wouldn't be able to get a birth certificate and it would be a terrible situation. So that was totally off the table. I definitely couldn't go to Thailand because I was way too big to get on an airplane. Like, not physically, but like they won't let you fly at that time. Can't have a baby in the air. And so I just was praying, and the doctor that was there from Wuhan, my American friend, she was just praying, and the Lord reminded me that whenever I was 20 weeks pregnant with Cheyenne, I had gone to Beijing because my mom had sent me some vitamins and they held them in customs and they wouldn't send them to me. And, I think back on it now, like, why in the world did I spend so much money to go all the way to Beijing to get my vitamins out of customs? I had to pay, literally, when I got there, I had to pay $1. That's how much it cost for me to get them out of customs, $1. And even the customs lady was like, "This is so strange. We normally don't hold things like this. Like, you only owe us $1. But, here it is. It's fine. It's nothing is, like nothing in your package is even like a questionable." I was like, "Okay, great. Well, I've just traveled all this way to come here to get my package from America. Thank you for giving it to me for only $1." And I was so flabbergasted in that moment at 20 weeks pregnant. But then I thought, you know what? I'm in America and there's this American hospital right down the road. I bet if I go there and get an ultrasound, they'll tell me if I'm having a boy or a girl, because none of the hospitals in my city would tell me the gender of the baby. And definitely you can't do blood tests or anything like that. And so I had gone to a hospital in Shanghai for Julie to find out if she was a girl. And so I did. I went to this American hospital, just kind of walked in and said, I'd like to get a checkup and see an ultrasound because you aren't allowed to see ultrasounds as a typical mother giving birth in China. And so they were like, oh, okay. They knew exactly, but they can't like technically say, oh, yes, we'll give you the gender of your baby. And I had already really thought that Shane was a boy. And so I went in and I met the doctor. She was so sweet and had an ultrasound. And they were like, it's not a girl, they didn't tell me the gender. And I was like, okay, great. I knew it. And so anyway, it was a great experience. I went back home to Guiyang. And but in that moment when I was 42 weeks pregnant, and I said, my only thought is, what if I went back to that American hospital in Beijing? And my doctor friend said, well, the only way another hospital would take you at this point is if you've been there. And I was like, I did go there. I went there at my 20 weeks because I wanted to see a picture of the baby. And she was like, oh my goodness, Melody, this could be the Lord because they probably have to take you as their responsibility if you've ever been there for this pregnancy. So sure enough, I immediately emailed the doctor and she emailed me back like within 2 hours. And she's like, get on a train, be as still as you can, get here as fast as you can. We will help you. And so I did. At 42 weeks pregnant, my mom, Jen, and I, and all of our baby stuff got on a train, couldn't fly. And we took the fast train, 12 hours to Beijing. And we got there very late at night and we spent the night at a hotel. And then we drove to or we got a taxi and went to the hospital. And I got checked in. They immediately gave me Pitocin, and within 12 hours, Shane was born. Um, and to say that I had a lot of amniotic fluid would be like not telling you how much amniotic fluid I had. Like when my water broke, it was like a river in that place. I remember thinking, this is the reason why I did not go into labor because there was so much water that was holding him there to protect me from going into labor before I needed to. And the Lord had been so with me during that whole time to make sure that I didn't have him before Sammy and George were adopted, that I didn't have him on a 12-hour train in the middle of nowhere, and that I got to have him in an American hospital in Beijing that honored all my crazy things that I wanted to do and that I didn't want to do. And the doctor was wonderful, but actually the midwife, the Chinese midwife that was there, she was precious. I mean, I can still just see her face. She's like an angel to me. She was so loving and kind and considerate. And she even gave me a mirror to help me whenever I was pushing. I was having such a hard time. Like I was exhausted. And she's like, I think it would help you if you could see. And then you can touch his head and then it'll help you. And I was like, she's so good. And it was really sweet and it was wonderful that my mom got to be there. And I just know that the Lord's hand was all over that. As traumatic as that whole season was, the Lord protected Shan in so many ways. Because after Shan was born, lots more traumatic things happened, right? Like we have to immediately try to figure out how to go to the consulate and get him a birth certificate and then get him a passport and then get him the ability to be able to get back to America because we knew at that time, like, we can't continue to stay here. Like, we have to leave the country. And even just the embassy being willing to work with us whenever we had to go to the embassy in a different city, whenever he was, like 2 weeks old. Just thing after thing after thing, the favor of the Lord was on us. And we had to take Sammy and George to another city to get their passports so that, they were able to travel to America. And one thing after another, the Lord opened the door of and allowed us to have the favor that we needed to be able to safely get back to America. So that took about 4 months from the time that Sham was born until we landed in America. And wow, that seemed like almost like a dream, not a great dream, but a dream that I can barely remember all the details to because it was like you're just floating, you're just making it by, you're just doing what you need to do to get to the next thing. And so much trauma and hard during that time. And just I prayed over Shan all the time, Lord, just heal him from all the trauma that I gave him that I didn't want to inflict on him. But like, I know he's experienced so much hard in utero. And um, I am very close to all of my children, but I think the Lord gave Shan and I a sweet postpartum time because we both needed that. And it makes me a little bit emotional to think about it, but like, he was like that sweet little comfort to me during such a hard time. And I was just thinking, like, I've got to do something to make you better because I've just taken you through like a terrible traumatic, incident that I had no control over. But still, it was a lot for my brain. And even now, I mean, Shan's 7, and he doesn't obviously remember all that, but his body remembers everything. And, the way that he responds, um, he's done a lot of sensory integrated therapy and has a lot of sensory needs and, some other kinds of needs that he has, like in response to whenever he feels like fight or flight and all those kinds of things. And so just learning about him and helping him to understand like how his body works. And, you know, I'm always fighting I probably caused this for you. And it was unintentional, but this is where we are and this is how we're going to get through it. And you're not alone. And, the Lord made our brains in such a way that, he does want to bring healing and he does want to, you know, be able to give Shan all the tools that he needs to be able to live a wonderful life. And I truly believe that. And Shan's so smart and awesome and amazing. Um, and he is very proud. He is very proud of the fact that out of the three littles, he's the only one born in China, like all the rest of the kids, except for Adriana. But he loves that. And so, the Lord also did give him a little gift and he'll always say, like, well, I'm the Chinese one that was born in China and the Chinese hospital and, like all the things. And, oh, one day I'm going to go back and see my hospital where I was born. And so it is really sweet. There are some really sweet things about it. And just remembering the goodness of the Lord in the middle of such darkness is so sweet. And what a sweet story that Shan has and that I get to tell him, one day whenever he's a little bit older to understand all the things. But the Lord protected him from so much. And I was able to give birth to him and I didn't have to have a C-section, even though I'm pretty sure whenever he was born it was like 42 plus 3. But we just didn't really talk about that. And he was still safe. And so definitely after Shane was born, I was thinking, like, I can never have a baby again. And then I had another loss after we were in the States. And then I got pregnant with William. And I just remember thinking, like, I do not know what's going to happen. Like, my hands are totally open, Lord. I had started out at a hospital. And, you know, of course, I'm like very geriatric in everyone's mind at this point. My geriatric pregnancy, most all my pregnancies were geriatric because I was in my late 30s for all of them. But the the doctor or the midwife that I was seeing at the hospital, she started getting like a little bit controlling in how she wanted to do things and how she wasn't okay with some of the ways that I wanted to do things. And I was also having to see an MFN doctor. And so going back and forth, I remember thinking, like, I have no peace delivering in this hospital with this woman and I can't do it. Like, if this is going to be a time, like, why would the Lord not, give me the desires of my heart? Why can I not try again for that home birth that I always wanted? And my friend Rachel was working for a midwife at the time. And, Rachel is my bestie. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you think? Like, do you think I can do it? Do you think she would take me? I'm like over halfway through the pregnancy and she's like, oh, you need to talk to her. I think she would. And the midwife herself had been a missionary overseas and had some of her babies overseas. And of course, all her babies pretty much were home births. But after talking to her, I trusted her so much. Like, she was so wise. And, she had a method that was going to work. And if it didn't, she had a backup plan. And so I felt secure in that. And I definitely could see her relationship with the Lord, how she was like led by the Holy Spirit. And That's what I wanted on my birth team. I wanted somebody who was not going to make a rash decision because they were afraid, but they were going to be led by the Holy Spirit and definitely allow the Lord to lead the birth. And so finally, after all those babies, it was really only two babies, two live babies. But my baby William, I went into natural labor. It was incredible. One of my dear friends had passed away, and I had found out in the morning. And I went to journey school, and I was just having a really hard time, just with the whole thing. And it was right after COVID time, and my friend had passed away from COVID, and I just was kind of in a funk. And I was like, I need to go see them. I need to go see my friends and their family, and I'm going to go to Sam's, pick up some groceries for them, and then I'm going to drive out there, and I just need to take the day. And I'm like humongous pregnant, 42 weeks pregnant, and um, I also had like a prenatal massage scheduled for the afternoon. And I'm like, okay, Lord, please, just I'm giving you one more time. I'm just giving you this baby, and you know the desires of my heart. And I had done a lot of counseling, a lot of therapy to get myself to this point, to where I even felt like, the Lord and I are good. Like we can do this together. And so I went to visit my friend's family and just had a lot of tears, a lot of release, and just enjoyed some time with them. And then went to my massage, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm feeling good. I feel like comfortable and relaxed, and I'm gonna get a Sonic drink, and then I'm gonna go home. And I was sitting at the Sonic waiting for the drink, and I'm like, I'm having some contractions. Like, and I'm like, I've never felt this. Like, by myself. Like, I don't have any IVs. I just like actually am having contractions. They weren't super close together, but I was sitting at Sonic for not very long, and I had already had a few. Like, this is amazing. I might actually go into labor. I just remember like, and then I'm like, no, don't tell yourself that, Melody. Don't get your hopes up. I'm going back and forth, back and forth. And so after I'd had a few, in a short amount of time, I'm like, okay, maybe I'll text my mom and tell her. So I texted her, and she called me, and she's like, okay, you really are having contractions. We're all just so surprised. Melody's never done this. And I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, I think so. Let me just see what happens. And I go home. They still stay consistent. And I do all the things with the kids, get them ready for bed, and still having contractions. They get a little bit more intense, a little bit more intense. And um, so then it's like 12. I text my midwife and say, okay, I think maybe I'm going into labor. And she's like, okay, text me if they're this, amount apart. And so um, I had prepared so much mentally for this birth. And I had birth affirmations like all over my bathroom, all over my bedroom, just like strings of scriptures and birth affirmations. And um, just been very intentional. Like, no matter what happens, Lord, I am prepared. Like, we're going to give birth to this baby together, and you're going to help me, and we're going to do it, and we can do it, and it can happen, and it's going to be okay. And so my parents started heading down here, got here in the middle of the night. The midwife came over in the middle of the night, and um, I just remember thinking, I mean, I'm like intensively having contractions, right? And this is not my first time to have a baby, but I just remember thinking, like, this is how it works. You get to have a contraction and then have a break. Like, I couldn't believe it because, like, for all those Pitocin contractions I'd had with Julie and Shan, like, there's no breaks, just Pitocin contractions for hours and hours and hours. And until I finally decided on both of them to, like, give in and get an epidural, which also made me frustrated, but I still did it on both of them because I had been having Pitocin contractions for so long. But for William, like every time it was such a joyful thing. It was the most joyful and life-giving and empowering. I felt like the strongest woman in the whole world. And of course, he was like, my water never broke until his head came out. And he was like sunny side up, and I had the worst back labor. And, It was not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but like he 12 hours, like 12 hours of labor. And he was born in the water in my home. So beautiful and so perfect. And I just, the love that I felt from the Lord. I mean, birth is already such a beautiful, redemptive thing, anyways, any way that you have a baby. And I want to validate that for everybody. Like, no matter if you have a C section or if you chose to, how, like, is all the birth ways, it's just beautiful and redemptive. And strong. You have to be a strong woman. Weak women don't give birth. Every woman who's given birth is strong. But I just remember praising the Lord. I mean, the worship music was going, it had been going the whole time, and just crying these tears of just complete joy and gratefulness to the Lord that my baby was here and he was safe and it was peaceful. There was no chaos. There had been so much chaos in the past. But there was so much peace and so much love in the room, and it was just perfect. It was the most perfect thing. And then I didn't have to go anywhere. I literally got to like take a shower and get in my bed, and it was been what I had always dreamt of, and it was beautiful. And my children were all around me, and I loved it. And I realized like some people are going to be like, that is the worst thing I've ever heard. But for me, it was the most sweetest gift that the Lord could have ever given me, was to be able to have that redemptive birth that I'd always dreamt of after so much trauma surrounding birth and, loss and all different kinds of loss. And, there was more loss after, but that sweetness of William, and William now, he loves to tell it like his birth story, like, oh, I was born at the house, in the bathtub, even though it wasn't a bathtub, it was a birthing pool. But like, I love that each one of my kids has like a sweet thing about their birth that they can talk about that like identifies them with their birth. And I think that's so important. And I see that also with my adopted kids. Like they each one have a sweet thing about their adoption. Like, well, this is whenever mom saw me, or this is whenever, we got to do this, that, or the other. But I think that's a gift that the Lord gives, like that they get to hold on to, not just my biological kids, but also my adopted kids had some stories like that too. So stories of birth, stories about how our kids came into our lives is so, so important. And I think it's fun to share them. I mean, maybe it's just a woman thing or a me thing, but I love hearing birth stories. When someone has a baby, I'm like, oh, tell me exactly how your birth was. I love it. No matter how it is. I love all birth stories because it's so special to the individual and to the situation, because all of our kids are so different. And no matter what happens, how the Lord like knits all the things together, whether it's a NICU stay or, you know, whatever, it's just so sweet to see how the Lord works whenever life comes into play, and how life is so important to Jesus, um and life is so important to me. I love life, and I love life of all the things. Really, I love people life, but I also love animal life. So recently in our home, we have a lot of animals. Um, might be the worst decision I've ever made, but I love living things and I love to watch them thrive and have happy lives. While we're right now having this podcast, my sweet dog Cinnamon is just like laid on the floor in front of me. And he did a few times walk around, and hopefully this mic didn't catch his toenails on the floor. But in one of our very early podcasts, he was barking at the door to want to come in. And so I said, skip that. He can always just be in our podcast with us. And he just like nicely lays there. But I think that the Lord gives us sweet, sweet relationships with people and with our children. He also gives us sweet relationships with our animals if you like animals. Um, but I so desperately love the relationship that the Lord gives a mother to a child. And I don't take that for granted at all. And just the joy that it brings me to raise them and to pour my life into them. And, you know, I was talking to someone the other day, and like the biggest job that I do is be a mother. Like that envelops 99% of my time has to do with mothering. Probably 100% of my time. Um, but mostly because I want to be an intentional mother and I love all my children so much and I want them to see their value and know their worth, but also like understand how the Lord sees them and how they can be healthy individuals and strong and obedient and kind and loving and see the world, in a beautiful way and not just America world, but like the whole entire world and have a really sweet and wonderful biblical worldview of what's around us and the people that are around us. And as a mother, I think we get the joy and also the responsibility, the privilege of being able to foster that in our children. And I just wanted to share a little bit about that today and hope that in the next few weeks, as we hear some more stories from moms and then some stories from children, that the Lord also inspires you and your stories. So thanks so much for listening.